Dateline Mystery.
"2 a.m. and the town of Tyler, Texas is quiet. A single set of headlights creeps down 29th Street towards a frame house set back among the trees. A shadow slips through a door and down a hallway towards a back bedroom. Inside, an 8-year-old boy named Chad Choice sleeps. He never makes a sound as the intruder gathers up the boy and carries him into the night. Sunday morning in Tyler, Texas. For Karen Choice, this morning is special.
That was my birthday that day, and I was getting ready for church, coffee, and reading, as I always did. And I decided not to wake the children.
The mother of 4 allows her children to sleep in and heads off to church. Just minutes into the service, Karen gets a call from home.
It was my daughter, and she asked me if Chad was with me. And I said, no, I left him at home. And she said, well, we've looked everywhere and we can't find him.
Within the hour, Karen, family, and friends are walking the neighborhood, looking for Chad, hoping the boy is just playing a game of hide and seek.
We were just looking up to see if he was just playing a joke on us, and we were walking around the house, looking up in the trees to see if he was there. But all in the same time, there was just something that I just had this feeling something was wrong.
Karen Choice puts a call into police. Sergeant Bill Gecking responds. The first thing he notices, no pry marks on the door and no sign of a struggle inside the house.
We didn't see anything like a forced entry, any blood trails, any signs of ransacking, things that would be indicative of a crime scene.
Gecking floats the idea that Chad might be a runaway. Chad's mother doesn't buy it.
That basically was not Chad, because as mischievous as he was and full of life and loved playing, he was still a mama's baby. And he would stick close to home. He would go to the apartments to play with his friends. He would go to the playground, but he didn't venture too far out from home.
Karen Choice believes her son has been kidnapped. As Sunday afternoon deepens into Sunday evening, that feeling becomes a certainty. And a mother wonders if she will ever see her son alive again.
Devastation, fear starts to set in, and you're wondering what is going on, who is he with? Because I knew it's dark now, and he's ready to come home.
2 days after her son disappeared, Karen Choice spends her days by the phone, waiting for a call from his kidnappers. That call never comes. Instead, there's a letter addressed to Karen's brother, Greg Sterling, and left on the front steps of the family business, a local funeral home. The letter reads, "If you want your boy alive, you'll do exactly what I say. He's okay now, but one mistake, and he'll be a memory." The note demands $10,000 be delivered to a Greyhound bus station, and adds this P.S. If we don't show, that means we heard something from our inside contact. Could even be your own family. Be careful.
It was a ransom, and then you begin to wonder who is doing this, who would do something like this, who would take a baby, from home for money.
With their case now officially a kidnapping, Tyler police invite the FBI to join the investigation. Jeff Block is an agent with the Bureau, and a man with a clear idea of where to look for Chad's kidnappers.
The fact that there was no visible signs of break-in led us to believe that there's a good chance that someone close to the family or in the family was somehow involved.
Among family and friends, one person in particular stands out as a suspect to police. The man who received the ransom note for Chad, his uncle Greg.
Greg Sterling had been in the drug scene for years. He was somewhat of our focus. maybe not as taking the child, but possibly being the cause of the child being taken.
Detectives speculate Sterling might need some cash to pay for his drug habit and is using his nephew to extort money from the family. Sterling denies any such involvement and further offers to help police with a briefcase full of cash. On the corner of Locust Street and Beaudark, a sting operation unfolds. Some detectives hide in bushes. Others sit in parked cars or pose as travelers, waiting for their ride to arrive. Also inside the Greyhound station is Greg Sterling, briefcase in hand. At a little past 2 p.m., he approaches a bench and drops the ransom money as instructed by the kidnappers. An hour later, the briefcase still sits on the bus station floor, untouched.
We waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. This concern started to rise that the person that the note mentioned that would be close to the investigation, close to the family, may be the person actually in the bus station with the money.
An hour later, the kidnappers are still a no-show, and the operation is terminated. Detectives ask Chad's family and friends to each take a polygraph. All passed the exam, save one.
All the members of the family passed the polygraph except for Greg Sterling, and he showed deception on several polygraph tests, several separate tests.
Detectives suspect Greg Sterling might be somehow tied in to his nephew's disappearance, but have no evidence to prove it. Investigators also know the clock is ticking. An 8-year-old boy's life hanging in the balance.
Kind of a rule of thumb, and it's not like this in every case, but if you're not on the road towards resolving something in 48 hours, it's going to be difficult to resolve.
48 hours have already slipped by, then a week, and a month. 6 months later, there are no further phone calls, no more ransom demands, and no discoveries of a body. Chad Choice's disappearance slips into the cold files, and his mother continues to wait.
It was almost like trying to catch your breath, and you're basically just out of air. That's just the way it seemed like it was just hard for me to even breathe. I would think about him, and it would just like take my breath away.
In October of 1991, 8-year-old Chad Choice disappears from his home. Investigators suspect he might be another victim of Tyler's drug trade, perhaps held as ransom for a debt owed by his uncle, Greg Sterling. Investigators, however, can put no meat on their theory. The suspicions about Sterling fade, and police are left to wonder who took the boy and why. Jeff Block is an agent for the FBI.
In a case like this, it's a giant jigsaw puzzle, and very few people have all the pieces. They might only have 1 or 2 small pieces that they don't even realize is a piece of the puzzle.
One morning, a year after Chad disappeared, one of the pieces to this puzzle drops into place in the form of another demand for ransom. It's a Wednesday, and Karen Choice is running late for work. At a little after 7:30 a.m., she heads out to her car, where she notices something flapping under her windshield.
We noticed that there was this note on the windshield. My immediate reaction was fear, because I'm looking around and I'm saying, here's someone that has come up to this yard again. But all in the same time, that gave me hope, thinking that, okay, they're ready to bring Chad home now.
The typewritten note is a demand for ransom, the second the Choice family has received, and the first contact with the kidnappers in more than a year. The note reads, I guess you have suffered enough. Even though he misses you a lot, he will never see you again unless you cooperate with me. Last time, death came close upon your son because of your stupidity. It will take $6,000 and no police. Get the money before next Tuesday and I will contact you.
When the second note was received, I think I had a couple of reactions. One was, it appeared to me that whoever was sending the notes was almost taunting the family, reopening a wound.
By this time, our hopes that Chad was alive were slim. We really didn't have any idea in our own minds that he would still be alive. So another demand would seem very strange.
Detectives pass the note along to forensics. The note, however, carries no prints or other clue as to who might have sent it. Chad's family can do nothing but wait for further instructions.
There was this renewal for a brief moment, and then we sat there and we waited and waited and waited on a call that didn't come through.
Karen Choice never gets a follow-up call after the note left under her windshield, and the case goes cold again. It will remain that way for 2 more years, until 1994, when a bank gets robbed, setting in motion a series of events that lead detectives back to the young boy's kidnapping. Hard by a set of railroad tracks sits the United Heritage Federal Credit Union. On the afternoon of July 21st, 2 men enter the union. Both are wearing masks and carrying guns. A few minutes later, they leave with more than $8,000. FBI agent Jim Mendez and Tyler police detective Bill Horton work the case.
For Tyler, Texas, any bank robbery was a big deal. Tyler's not a big town. It's a fairly small town. We didn't have a whole lot of bank robberies.
We had some general suspect information, and no evidence really recovered at the scene that would lead us to anybody in particular.
The investigators' best lead, a partial tag number of the getaway card scribbled down by a witness. Texas Department of Motor Vehicles provides 400 possible matches to the partial plate number. Better than nothing, but still a long shot.
400 cars is a lot of cars to try and sort down, and the state of Texas is a big state. We started in Tyler and started working our way out, looking at possibles, and as time went on, we still hadn't identified any vehicles that would be good, viable leads.
3.5 months later, Horton and Mendez are rapidly getting nowhere when the credit union gets hit again. It's 2 in the afternoon on November 8th, 1994, when the tellers at United Heritage replay a nightmare. For the second time in 3.5 months, 2 men enter the union wearing masks and carrying guns.
The exact same credit union gets robbed. Again, it's the same thing. 2 men come in with their faces covered up, carrying weapons, immediately rush the tellers, catching them off guard, and demand money.
It was our belief that probably the same 2 people were responsible for it. It happened in the same manner. 2 black males walked in, masked.
Unlike the first robbery, this time surveillance cameras are in place, capturing an image of the 2 suspects.
One of the pieces of clothing was fairly unique. The rest of it was pretty nondescript, but one of the subjects was wearing a hooded plaid jacket, and the hood on the jacket was solid gray.
Details on the robbery, as well as pieces of the surveillance tape, are broadcast 3 hours later on the 5 o'clock news. Tyler Patrol Officer Luis Correa is at home watching when the tape catches his eye.
And they show the bank robbers wearing ski masks. Well, the bank robbers, one of them was exceptionally tall, the other one was shorter.
Just moments earlier, Correa was standing outside his home when he noticed his next-door neighbor, Chris Wells, walking down the street with a friend. Wells is tall, while his companion is short, both wearing clothes similar to what Correa had seen in the surveillance video. To a veteran cop's eye, the 2 seemed to be acting strange.
Both young men were looking behind their shoulders, over their shoulders, and every time a car went by, they looked at it, and they acted real nervous.
Correa gets on the phone and shares his suspicions with detectives. Bill Horton believes Correa's tip is a long shot, but worth checking out.
It sounded like a pretty good lead because the officer knew him and was very adamant about the clothing that he was wearing at the time, which, like I say, was within not too many minutes after the robbery.
Jim Mendez and fellow FBI agent Jim Hersley head over to Chris Wells' home. His brother Keith answers the door. Almost immediately, investigators catch a glimpse of a hooded sweatshirt similar to the one used in the robbery. Then they show Keith a photo from the video surveillance.
We showed him the photograph, and he literally looked at it, and this is a photograph that you can't really make out a whole lot other than that jacket. He says, "That's Chris."
Chris Wells is arrested and brought downtown for questioning.
You have the right to remain silent, not make any statement at all.
Inside an interview room, Detective Bill Horton sits with Chris Wells. The topic of discussion, robbery.
Right now, we are looking into robbery of the credit union over here on Oakland Street, the railroad tracks, Houston. I want you to tell us what you know about it.
Confronted with the videotape, Chris Wells confesses to both credit union robberies, fingering a local named Gene Lindsay as an accomplice, and another local named Pat Horn as the brains behind the stick-ups.
He said, but, you know, the money we gotta get, you gotta be down for it. He said, you don't have no nuts, you ain't gonna have no glory.
2 days later, Gene Lindsay sits in the same room as Chris Wells. He, too, is eager to talk, admitting his role in both credit union heists, and then going further with a story of another crime. This one not robbery, but murder, pure and simple.
He said, motherfucker, you gonna die.
The old man said that?
Chris
said that. Okay.
I told him, no, man.
What'd the man do?
He tried to take out running.
In October of 1991, Chad Choice is abducted from his home in Tyler, Texas. 3 years later, 3 men, Chris Wells, Gene Lindsay, and Pat Horn, are implicated in a series of local bank robberies. The connection between the missing boy and the robberies is well hidden, revealing itself in small steps. The first of those being a story of murder that took place on a dusty afternoon alongside a country road in Smith County, Texas. It's a quiet morning, and Patrol Officer Melody McKay begins her day driving through the larger part of Smith County. Her route starts in Tyler and heads south towards Lake Palestine. This morning, like most, is reserved for checking in with local fruit vendors, most of whom set up along a stretch of Highway 155. One such vendor is 80-year-old J.C. Levasseur.
Mr. Levasseur, along with several other gentlemen, used to sell produce along the side of the roads. And, of course, in daily duties, you know, you're just riding around talking to people, and sometimes I would stop in and buy produce or just stop in and talk.
As McKay arrives, she notices Levasseur is just setting up his stand for the day.
I stopped and talked to him because it was payday, and I said, well, I'll be back. I got to get my check cashed, and I'll have some money, and I'll come back and get my produce.
The officer says goodbye to Levasseur and continues her patrol, never imagining the next time she saw J.C. Levasseur, he'd be a murder victim. 3 p.m., and Officer McKay is just finishing rounds when she picks up a call on her radio. J.C. Levasseur has disappeared from his fruit stand. McKay arrives on scene a few moments later.
I was looking around his stand, see if there's anything unusual, and his fruit was still there. There was still some money under a rock. Didn't show any real signs of struggle. And they said, well, his truck is parked down here almost in the middle of the road. And at the time, something was wrong. Just in my gut told me something was wrong.
Levasseur's truck is abandoned, less than a mile from his fruit stand.
No keys, sitting in park, windows rolled down, and I thought, well, why would it be all the way down here when it's parked beside the trailer usually? So that didn't make any sense to me.
A bystander then calls for Melody's attention, saying he's found something in the woods. He leads the patrol officer down a dirt path.
So I walked down there, and the minute I saw the clothes and everything, I knew immediately it was Mr. Levasseur. That was kind of tough, to have talked to somebody that morning, and now you find him dead on the ground.
Levasseur lies face down in the woods, a pool of blood underneath his head. The first question that comes to McKay's mind, why? And
I thought, this poor man, you didn't have to do this to him. He couldn't fight you, even if there's 1 or 3 or more. And he would have given you that old truck. I mean, you could tell it happened to him pretty quick, because it's like he just fell down. Not to his knees or anything, he just fell.
The patrol officer calls for backup and secures the scene, suspecting robbery to be the motive. She takes a peek inside Levasseur's pockets.
I started checking around his body, still found the money in his pocket. I could still feel the money, and all I could do was just cover him up. I felt like that's what I needed to do, was cover him up.
Detective Jason Waller meets McKay at the scene and examines the body. Levasseur died from a single shot to the back of the head. Why remains anybody's guess.
This is one thing that you wonder, what was the motive? Why would someone kill this 80-year-old man who just sowed produce on the side of the road, didn't hurt anybody?
The only thing Waller could figure, someone wanted J.C. Levasseur truck, and when the carjacking went south, Levasseur had to die. Waller's theory gained some traction when tips begin to filter in. People who saw two black males that day, struggling to get Levasseur's standard transmission truck out of first gear.
Two young black males, one taller than the other, thin, the taller one being thinner, the other one kind of being a little stocky, a little darker complected. We've got a physical description. If we could just find pictures, put faces, together, that we might be able to identify them, at least to go question them.
For days, Waller beats the bushes, trying to put skin, bones, and a name to his descriptions. The investigation, however, goes nowhere.
Here was a true victim, an innocent man trying to make an honest dollar, just retired and trying to enjoy life with a woman he'd been married to for 60 years, just trying to spend his last years of his life, and then someone come and take it. And so it was frustrating.
5 weeks later, Detective Waller gets the break he needs when police pull in Gene Lindsay for the credit union stick-ups. Lindsay quickly confesses to the robberies, fingering two accomplices, Pat Horn and Chris Wells. Hoping to get a better deal for himself, Lindsay then tells detectives about another crime the three men committed, the J.C. Levasseur carjacking.
He told him, be quiet and get in the truck.
Y'all have guns?
Yep, at 22.
According to Lindsay, Levasseur showed them how to drive the truck, traveling a ways down the road. Then, according to Lindsay, the old man got out. Chris Wells got out with him.
Told Chris to let the man go. Chris said he had to show him something.
Had a what?
Had to show him something.
Show him something.
Yep. Told the man that we had a friend down there. We wanted him to take him up there.
But once they got him out of the truck and started walking away from the truck, Christopher Wells turned basically to him and said, listen, the old bastard's got to die. He's seen us. He knows who we are. He can identify us.
He said, motherfucker, you gonna die.
The old man said that?
Chris
said that. Okay.
I told him, no, man.
What'd the man do?
He tried to take out running.
When Chris said that, he took off running?
Yeah.
He did?
And so at that point in time, Mr. Levasseur apparently begged for his life. He told him that, listen, hey, take my money, take my billfold, take my truck, just don't let me die. And at that point in time, Christopher Wells shot at him and grazed him. Mr. Levasseur apparently made some movement away from him. I mean, Christopher Wells ran up to him and then shot him in the back of the head.
He did like this. I said, no, Chris, no, man. He said, no, this old bastard's finna die. He shot him in the head, man, just fell.
Chris Wells, Gene Lindsay, and Pat Horn are arrested on capital murder charges, each looking at a possible death penalty for shooting J.C. Levasseur. Their story, however, is far from finished. As they await trial, one of them receives a package in prison. Inside it, the leg bone of a young boy, the final link in a chain of death that takes cold case detectives back to 8-year-old Chad Choice. In October of 1991, an 8-year-old boy named Chad Choice disappears from his home without a trace. 3 years later, a local con named Pat Horn sits in a Texas jail cell, arrested for the carjacking murder of an 80-year-old fruit peddler. No obvious connection exists between the two crimes. That is, until the human bones of a young boy begin to surface in Tyler, Texas. The first to receive such a package, Chad Choice's family. Like every parent of a missing child, Karen Choice knows the statistics. After 48 hours, the chance of a child returning home alive gets smaller by the minute. By the fall of 1995, Karen's son Chad has been gone for 4 years.
I just kept saying, no, this could be the one that they're wrong about. You know, he could still be there. He's still out there, and I'm going to still actively search, no matter what the stats are saying.
One fall morning, a grocery sack is left on the doorstep of the Choice home. Inside it, a human skull, and the moment Karen Choice has been dreading.
I didn't want to believe it. There was this part of me that was saying, this may be, but I'm saying no. No, this is not Chad. Chad is still alive.
Bill Horton has worked Chad's disappearance from the beginning. Along with the skull, he ponders a note found inside the bag that states, "You only paid part, so here is a part."
Well, at this point, there is no leverage now. Any hopes that they would have had, in my opinion, of getting any more money if they deliver the skull, there's no reason to give him more money.
Cold case detectives send samples of the skull to the FBI for DNA comparison with samples taken from Chad Choice's family. The results, however, are inconclusive. Investigators then turn to a university in Texas and the science of forensic anthropology. Dr. Harold Gilking is an anthropologist at the University of North Texas. He takes delivery of the skull left on Karen Choice's front porch. Unfortunately, there are no dental x-rays available from Chad Choice, making a comparison of teeth impossible. Dr. Gilking then asks the family for any recent photos of the missing boy.
Sometimes, and particularly in the case of children, when there is not much of a medical or dental record, we might resort to other techniques. For example, if we think we know who the remains represent, we might ask for photographs of the individual, and we might attempt to do some sort of comparison between the skeletal remains and a photograph. Good on the left.
Gilking places the skull in a sandbox, turns on a video camera, and rolls tape. Using a computer, he overlays the image with a photo of Chad and begins the comparison.
We burn an image of the photograph into memory in the computer, and we gradually bring in the skull to see if we can fit it into that picture.
Working with different photos, Gilking determines that the skull left on the family doorstep belongs to Chad. In her heart, Karen Choice has known her boy was unlikely to ever be found alive. She never thought, however, that his skull would be delivered to her front door.
Who could be this demonic to do something like this and then to place it on the family's doorstep? Who is this person? And I mean, I think that there was an anger that rose up in me that I had never felt before. I had to see who this person was.
The motive of the kidnapping and the reasoning behind the notes still mystifies authorities. The skull, however, gives cold case detectives their first solid piece of evidence in 5 years. They are about to get a second piece, and it comes from inside a Texas jail cell. In April of 1996, Pat Horn sits in a Texas jail cell, looking at either life or a possible death sentence for his part in 2 bank robberies and the murder of fruit stand owner J.C. Levasseur. Horn decides he wants to cut a deal and mentions the name Chad Choice.
He's in a very dangerous light at this point because we're conversing with him, we're talking to him, and now Chad Choice's name has come up, and that has really got our interest.
Pat Horn lived in the same neighborhood as Chad Choice and knew the family. He claims the boy was killed by 2 local drug dealers, Colombian nationals who go by the street names Paco and Carlos.
They had somewhat a history of violence, and so that was possible, and they had a connection to Pat Horn. On the other hand, we also considered it a real possibility that Pat was kind of making it up as he went along, trying to get out of his predicament.
We are hopeful because he had told us something that we highly suspected all along. Knowing Pat, though, we were not totally convinced that what he was telling us was all of the truth.
Horton and Block run down leads on Paco and Carlos. The 2, however, are alibied out. Cold case detectives are about to dismiss Horn as a credible source when the investigation takes yet another twist. Pat Horn receives a package in his jail cell. Inside it, the leg bone of a young boy.
The jailers intercept this package that was sent to Pat Horn. And they find what appears to be a leg bone and also a note threatening him that if he gives any information about Chad Choice that they'll kill him or kill his family.
The leg bone is confirmed as human and eventually confirmed as belonging to Chad Choice. The question is, who sent it? Pat Horn claims it was Paco and Carlos. Cold case detectives suspect Horn knows more than he is telling. FBI agent Jim Wilkins.
I think one thing that made us doubt Pat Horn was knowing just how much he was involved with these guys, because Pat had a reputation of exaggerating and trying to build up his own self-importance.
He really opens the door wide as far as us looking at him as being involved in this, certainly more so than he tells us.
Months after the leg bone is confirmed as belonging to Chad, Pat Horn still claims to know nothing more about the disappearance. Then he gets a visit in prison from a mother desperate for any scrap of information about her missing son.
Pat, please. Please, Pat. Pat, I got to know.
Karen Choice has known Pat Horn since he was 5. In the spring of 1996, she learns he is in jail, awaiting sentencing on a charge of murder. She also discovers he has had a package delivered to his cell. In it, the leg bone of Karen's missing son.
It was basically just settling in my mind that here's this person that I knew as a little boy that had something to do with my son's kidnapping and his murder, and all I wanted to know then was, where are his remains?
On May 24th, 1996, Karen Choice walks into a police interrogation room and sits down. Across from her, a former family friend, now someone she barely recognizes.
I guess that was what was so strange when I finally saw him face to face, because this was totally a different person than the one that used to come to my house and play with the children.
Karen Choice wastes little time with Horn, digging deep, pleading for information about her son's murder, or at least the location of his bones.
I treated you like you were my son. Always welcome in my house. Fed you. Prayed for you. What about Chad? You want to see a picture to remind you? Don't you want to see his picture? I need to know, Pat. I need to know.
He did not want to tell me anything, and it was almost like he did not know who I was. I was just somebody that just came in, and interrupted his life.
What about Chad's life? Nobody gave him that choice. And I need to know.
Pat Horn bows his head, but remains as silent as the grave. Then cold case detectives turn up the heat, hoping to rattle the convict.
You talk like you're some sort of badass. Damn it, you put your own ass there when you took her boy. You shouldn't have took her boy. Damn it. Don't nobody. Damn, treat you like family, Pat. Help her out. Get off your ass, Pat, and help her out. Just help her out. We want that boy back for that lady.
Finally, Karen Choice comes across the room toward Pat Horn, gets on her knees, and begs for answers.
Pat. Pat. I've got Pat. Pat. Pat, talk to her. Pat, please. Please, Pat. Pat, I got to know. Pat.
The interview ends with the fate of Chad Choice, a mystery to all except his killers. 1 week later, Pat Horn is still marking time in his cell, that much closer to a possible berth on Texas death row. With his options running thin, Horn again calls cold case detectives with more information on Chad. According to Horn, Paco and Carlos are still the killers, but now Horn admits he actually saw the murder and knows where Chad is buried. Jeff Block is an agent with the FBI.
Eventually he told us that he had helped, that he had dug a grave for Chad at the direction of Paco and Carlos.
he tells us, he says, see, you know, basically I'm a victim in this crime as well. All I did was help bury the child, didn't have any other involvement in it, and now they're threatening me because of my knowledge of what they did.
Horn claims Chad Choice is buried in Horn's own backyard. Investigators put the convict in cuffs and drive into the heart of Tyler's West Side. At 4 p.m. on May 31st, detectives start to dig. FBI agent Jim Wilkins is at the scene.
Some of the agents and officers dug down. They hit a plastic bag and dug a little more and found bones, found clothing.
The remains are that of a young boy, quickly identified as Chad Choice. Also in the grave, .380 caliber shell casings, probably the shots that killed Chad. The boy's remains are unearthed and sent to the morgue. Meanwhile, Chad's mom gets the phone call she has been waiting for and dreading for more than 5 years.
All of the years of hoping, you know, that he would come home, at that very moment, you know, it was over. And I would never see him as that little boy. You know, again, it truly tore my heart completely.
Pat Horn claims he has told detectives all he knows and wants to cut his deal for leading them to the body. Cold case detectives, however, are not in the mood to bargain.
Not everybody has a body buried in their backyard and then hides it for years. So we were still very suspicious of him and not totally satisfied that he was giving us all of the truth.
Some of us started saying, hey, this doesn't fit because he knows too much. And finally, we came to the conclusion that he was there when it happened or was the one that did it.
Investigators believe Pat Horn is Chad's killer, but don't have the juice to charge him. That is, until they talk to Horn's brother and put together the final pieces to their case for murder. Keithan Horn is Pat Horn's younger brother. In June of 1996, he sits in a jail cell in Athens, Texas, booked on a probation violation. While he's in there, cold case detectives take a chance.